Welcome back. We're looking forward, B'ez Hashem, to continue on the 19th epistle in this segment, the Geras HaKodesh, which is the fourth segment of Sefer Tanya Kadisha. We mention it, I believe, maybe too many times, but we always think about any newcomers or even a newcomer, just to have a backdrop. Tanya is comprised of 5 segments. It is with precision. Tanya is known to be the Torah Shebiksav of Teres Achsidus. This comes from the Tzemach Tzedek himself. Thus 5 segments. The fourth segment is Igeres HaKodesh. We did mention quite a few times that Igeres HaKodesh, in comparison to the previous segments, is quite distinct. The fact that it's Igeres, these are 32 separate letters, even though the Alter Rebbe does periodically cross-reference from one letter to the other, but extremely rare in this segment, as these are separate letters written different times, addressing different ideas, as opposed to the first 3 segments, which is Lukuti Amarim, Shaychet V'Emunah, and Igeres HaTshuva. They are chapter after chapter. Means the chapters are connected to it's one idea. These chapters are sequential. They're one idea, which is conveyed in Igeres HaTshuva, about the greatest gift mankind, particularly Am Yisrael, receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the gift of tshuva, one realigning himself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Igeres HaKodesh tshuva is very unique. The Alter Rebbe is an inimitable way of presenting an inimitable message in this Avedus HaTshuva, perhaps like no other. Like we most spoke about Shaychet V'Emunah, appreciating the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The way it comes through the eyes of the Alter Rebbe in this second segment, we did use very briefly this terminology, Tanya in general, Lukuti Amorim in particular, which is, when you say Tanya, predominantly it's Lukuti Amorim, which is the famous 53 chapters, which is the Alter Rebbe's manual to Avodas Hashem. We call it many times the perfect manual to Avodas Hashem. You get a machine, you get a device, and you have a manual which tells you pretty much how to run the machine, and you're okay, you're good to go. But there's a lot of stuff that which are you don't get, for example, in one manual. Let's say you look it up and you get the general idea and you get it going and it's okay, but there's many details which you're missing out on. And if you have a manual or read a manual with all these details, appreciating that device would have been totally different. It would be a game changer in many cases. So too, the Alter Rebbe's manual to Avodas Hashem is nothing less than perfect. We spoke about this. It's not just another Sefer Musar, which each Sefer Musar, of course, written by Gdolei Yisrael, Yisidosam Baharei Kodesh, and they meant the best for their flock and their times, and for all times for which the Svarim were written for, and published for all times, for that matter. And nonetheless, there is the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. It is a sefer where we say the perfect manual. It's not just complementing a particular sefer. The Alter Rebbe was here as introduction to the Baal Shem Tovs. The times of Baal Shem Tov began as a spark, to introduce the sparks of Yemei Mashiach. The Alter Rebbe with Chassidus Chabad, which is the direct introduction to Yemei Mashiach, which the whole idea of Yemei Mashiach is the Das Kved Hashem, Das Kved Hashem, Imolei as Kved the Umolo Ha'oretz Deas Hashem, like the Rambam writes towards the end of his magnum opus Mishnah Torah, V'le'yese kolei kolei elo le'das Hashem, V'vichi Yisrael Chachamim G'dolim V'yedu Das Beidom. This idea of Chassidus Chabad was in the introductory to this special, auspicious time which the world is going to enter into, the idea of appreciation in their Creator, understanding, perception, clarity in their Creator, that oneness between Creator and creation. It's like we mentioned so many times, the Avis of Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov were 400 years prior to Matan Torah. There was the introduction, the introductory spirit which led Am Yisrael to the state of Yitzias Mitzrayim through Moshe Rabbeinu, Kabbalah Satayim, and so on. Mesa Mashiach, there's the introductory to Mesa Mashiach, which is the Nisi Chabad, L'Dereisam, with the Torah of Chabad, Chochmah Bina Das. Das is about the Adaita Hayim. Das is about the Imolor Deas Hashem. So again, we did mention it many times, and therefore we didn't say Tanya is complimenting Tanya. Tanya is, let's say, the perfect manual to Avodas Hashem, because this is written by the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe was the first Nasi of the Seder of the Chabad dynasty, which is Chabad. It's nothing else more than Chabad. It's about Chassidus Chabad. It's about the Rabbeim, which came at this important juncture, pre-Maisa Mashiach, to introduce to the nation, ultimately to the world, the idea of Yedias Hashem. So that is the Lukuti Amorim, and again, you have to learn it and be your own witness and attest to the distinct study of Tanya. It's really thus an obligation for every Yid, which is looking for success in his derech ha'ila base kale, to be baki in Lukuti Amorim, the first chelik, just to know that, as we know, that Yiddishkeit is not only the formal stuff we do in the 24 hours of the day. It's it's much more than that. It's a 24-hour. In 24 hours, in every hour there's 60 minutes, in every minute there's 60 seconds, and every second there's 1,000 milliseconds. And we know that part of the package of Yiddishkeit is what we're doing or not doing in the milliseconds of that very second, and then how it accumulates. In the end of the day, we realize there's so much more that we have to appreciate, or we're obligated to appreciate in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's enormously nuanced, and there's the between the lines, and we have to get it right, because we are Avdei Hashem, and in order to get it right, we have to have a perfect manual. The Tanya, again, we spoke about this in the length, but let's try not to. We'll point this out over here. This idea of Lukuti Amorim also, despite this is the predominantly when you say Tanya, it's Lukuti Amorim, but all three first segments are one idea. Lukuti Amorim, even though you can say, we mentioned this as well many times, Lukuti Amorim is grouped in different ideas come about through different chapters, as it's known. But nonetheless, you learn Tanya time and again, you can really connect the very first chapter to the 53rd. It's actually much longer than Sharichat B'Emuna and Igeres HaTshuva. But the common denominators, they're all sequential. It's one idea. The Alter Rebbe presents of the manual to Avodas Hashem, and then Sharichat B'Emuna, the unique and inimitable presentation of the Alter Rebbe in the matters of Achdus Hashem, oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then Igeres HaKodesh, Igeres HaTshuva. And again, the unique way of the Alter Rebbe, you have to study. Be your own judge. Study Lukuti Amorim and Sharichat B'Emuna and Igeres HaTshuva. It is indeed a game changer in every possible thinkable and unthinkable way. And then comes Igeres HaKodesh. Igeres HaKodesh is another segment, which is a compilation of 32 letters of the Alter Rebbe. And the letters are distinct. They're written to different, again, mentioned earlier, they've been different times addressing different ideas. Even though we did mention quite a few times that there's a common denominator between all the Igeres HaKodesh. If you want to say a one thread through all of them, yeah, it's probably the mitzvah of tzedakah. Alter Rebbe, so again, it's also based on the famous campaign of the Alter Rebbe, his tzedakah campaign towards the group which made the famous Aliyah, led by Rav Tzadik, Rav Mendel Haradoker, made the famous Aliyah. They were going through a very difficult time. Alter Rebbe had Mesiras Nefesh to raise significant funds for them. For that matter, let's just land on this introduction. We have a whole presentation in this the 10th of Igeres HaKodesh. So just to point out, there's many more letters of the Alter Rebbe, but these were chosen to be part of the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. It's a different game. It's a different idea. It's not only a Igeres HaKodesh, every Igeres of the Alter Rebbe, which he penned. Alter Rebbe being Kodesh HaKadoshim is of course Igeres HaKodesh, but it made it Tanya Kadisha. It's a total different level. Then there's Kuntres Achrin, which is the 5th segment. We'll get there. Be'ezus Hashem will explain it, because the Kuntres Achrin is even more unique and maybe even more complex even than any other all the other 4 segments. But the Igeres HaKodesh, again, we had a whole presentation in Yud, in the 10th Igeres, 10th letter, which is 9 back. All these classes from the very beginning of Lukuti Amorim, this we do mention, and of of course, importantly mentioned wherever you're watching, but there's an advantage of the original website, TanyaOnline, one word.com. TanyaOnline.com. There's namely the advantage that all the classes are lined up on the left side of the screen. It's a click away, like we're learning now. I believe this is your test. It's the third class on this Igeris, on this epistle, on this letter. So just if you're following, so you know what we're holding, you know what we're talking about. And if not, it's a click away. The latter classes are on the top of the screen. But you go down and you see all the classes of the previous classes. And we ourselves cross-reference from time to time certain ideas which are explained barichus in length. There's no reason to elaborate and take time. It's because it's truly a click away, and you can see it without Rebbe elaborates. And this idea, which, for example, sometimes it's discussed, and again, literally translated poor, succinct in one place, but elaborative in another. And you have so many ideas, which are, of course, explained in the previous segments. Many times we send you to those segments, easy to follow. Also, the text is set up with a separate scroll bar, easy to follow. But namely, it's the previous classes, which is really the advantage of this very particular website. So, Avol l'mayla minhim. So we went on last 2 weeks, and we explained, based on the pasuk, that Hashem covers His light, the light of Torah, invests His light like a salma, places it into a cloak. We explained this, no reason, again, click away in the very beginning, the first class, we explained this pasuk. And then the next part goes on, we did mention, I'm going to say this again, that's the first Igeris, and probably the first part of the Likutei Amorim, or the whole Sefer Tanya Kandisha, that is, that it's a bit detailed, it's a bit not as smooth, and not easy to appreciate like all the other previous chapters, literally up till here, up till the Yutes. And it's known, Yutes, it's a little more cryptic, a little more abstract, terminologies of Kabbalah, Sfiris over here, it's like a lot of stuff which needed to be really explained, and we took the time. It's the reason why we didn't, reach so much in the text, because we took the time to explain as much as we can. And again, it's a click away the previous classes, so we won't repeat all this. We'll go straight to where we're holding. We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. That higher than Netzach Chod Yesod Malchus, which is the lowest of the four spheres, Moshe Rabbeinu did not have any perception in the Pnimius, only Kibchenes Achirayim, the Chochma, the about face of Chochma, which is the first sphere. Hamelubeshes Bebina, which is invested in Bina, which is the second sphere, and there itself, he had just the achirayim, between the about face of the energy of Bina, which is invested in the pnimius of Nihim and Netzach Yisei Malchus. Beside Neglis Chochma Shalamayla Torah. This which drips, flows from the wisdom on high, which is Torah, which is B'chinas Zah, which is a level of Midas. And what level of Midas Netzach Yisei? Look, it says, you'll see my about face, my pnimis you will not see. Look there, and the gate of Nevuah, the first chapter. And it explains there, this very pasuk, so we read a few lines, but let's try to explain a little more. It's all based on what we learned the previous 2 weeks. So really, we're going to really try not to repeat, because it's not fair, because it's really a click away to see what we achieved in explaining this in the last 2 classes. But it's all based on that very pasuk. Everything we learn about here, though, the Rebbe says, Moshe didn't have the perception in the pnimis of Chochmah, just the about face of Chochmah, and not even in the pnimis of Bina. In other words, the about face of Chochmah ends up being expanded on in Bina. But in the Pnimis of Bina, he also didn't have a perception. What are we talking about? We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. What means he didn't have a perception? What do we know about Moshe's perception? Answer, the Torah tells us about Moshe's perception. V'ra'isa is ha'chayre. You'll have perception, you'll have vision, sensory vision, of course, in in the about face, but uponai leiro, the pnimis you will not see, says Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how we know that he didn't have Asog in the pnimis of Chochmah. And the pnimis of Bina, and not even the pnimis of the first three of the Midas, but only in the pnimis of Netzach Yisod Malchus. So the backdrop of this is, remember, in Parshas Kisi, so that Moshe Rabbeinu asks to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem said, put you into the crevice of the stone, and I will walk by, and I'll put my hand over the stone, of course, metaphorically, and when I walk by, you'll be able to see the about face of me, but not my pnimius, not my face. So Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, reached a level that nobody else ever reached. For that matter, Moshe Rabbeinu was considered the greatest Navi, even though it does say in a number of places that Mashiach will be even an edge, a notch over. But nonetheless, the overall, there's nobody. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Navi of all generations. Ektatus says that, in the end of Dvarim, describing Moshe Rabbeinu, he was the Navi. He wasn't just another Navi, another leader. He was Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, even the Reisis HaChayda was a great and grand deal to see the about face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it was short of the pnimis of the Ponai. So we say Ponai, you could say, the face Hashem didn't show him, he should show him about face. Yeah, it resonates, and couldn't see the face of Hashem. He only saw the about face of Hashem. But that's if you kind of put it in an image the way we can appreciate, let's say, lahavdil, a human being. That someone begs somebody, I need to see your face. No, you won't be able to see my face. You'll see the about face. And the person walks by and you're able to see the about face. Yeah, you recognize him. It's distinct. You look at another party, say, no, that's not the person that I saw. I saw this party very distinctly, and I'll never mix up with any other party. Even the about face of another party. This is what my eyes captured about that unique look. And of course, you're talking about the about face, a very distinguished, let's say, lahavdil, many times over lahavdil, a human being, in comparison to the Eibishter, of course, to Hashem, distinct looking person. Yeah, you lock it in and there's no comparison. You never get mixed up with another party. Because your eyes were able to capture that image of that party, even though it was the about face of the other party, not his face. Of course, the face would be a greater capture of the pnimius, of the core of the other party, which usually comes out in the face. You saw the about face, but nonetheless, Moshe Rabbeinu saw what the average person doesn't see. So, based on this pasuk, v'ra'isa sachayris, in my about face and not my pnimius, that's where it's in Shara Nevuah, and it's brought in a number of places that Moshe Rabbeinu in the Kutetayt of the Arizal, in Kisisa and Parshas Vayikra, and he makes it very clear, based on this pasuk, it's not that Arizal just like, I know what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. It's all predicated on this pasuk. The Kutetayt says what he says. So the question is, so he didn't see the pnimis of Chacham, he only saw the Ritzenis of Chacham, which enters into Bina, like we explained last week. We're not going to do this again. We took a lot of time explaining what the Ritzenis of Chacham comes to Bina, not the core of Chacham. Got to check out last week's class. Click away. And 2 weeks ago as well, but I think we elaborated more on last week. And then the Bina, also not the Pnimis of Bina. Because the Pnimis of Bina, the fact that it goes over to Zoh, it's already the Chitzein, is the external dimension of Bina. We explained that last week as well. So he didn't have a Kineka Soga based on this pasuk in Pnimis of Bina. But also, the Alter Rebbe says even Pnimis of the first three and chief Midas, which is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Explained that last week as well. Also not in the Pnimius of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. What did he have a connection? What did he have this vision? To Netzach Yisod Malchus, to the four lower spheres of the 10 spheres. There he had a connection, a Pnimius, a connection, a inward connection, which means he did connect to the Pnimius of Netzach Yisod Malchus. So the question begs, yes Pnimius or no Pnimius? So Panaleiro, you say it's not the Panim of Chachma, it's the Acheirai of Chachma. It's not the Panim of Bina, it's the about face of Bina. And it's not the Panim of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, it's the about face of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So where did he have a Pnimius Dike, or the connection, we say, to what Pnim is the level that you have. The Pnim is a Netzach Yisay Malchus, but if it's Pani Le'yiro, so why don't we just go down the line? Not the Pnim is of Chachma, not the Pnim is of Bina, not the Pnim is of Chesed Gvura, not the Pnim is of Netzach Yisay Malchus. Why do you stop at Netzach Yisay Malchus and say, yes, the Pnim is of that? Pani Le'yiro. Answer, we did this also, we indicated this in the last week's class, even though there we were focusing on why the Pnimis of Chachma doesn't end up in Bina. It's only the Chitzenis of Chachma ends up in Bina. Again, we explained it thoroughly. Chasdei Hashem, of course. And then the Chitzenis of Bina could only end up in Midas because if the Bina is there in its full manifestation, Midas cannot kick in. We explained it as well. So the Pnimis, it could only be the Chitzenis of Bina which could ultimately lead to the manifestation of Midas. And so too, the Chesed Gvura Tiferes, that's the Pnimis of the experience. We mentioned this briefly last week, because the Netzach Yisay Malchus, that's the execution of these Midas. Someone loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he stands a whole day with a determination, which is a nitzachim, to make sure that there's perfect alignment throughout the entire day. I love Hashem, so I'm going to hold on. So the Netzach, as an example, which is the first of the four, and so to Hoid and Yisoid, it's the execution of the sensation of Chesed Gvura Tiferes. It's the execution of the sensational experience. I have Av and I have Yiro and I have Rachamim. So how do I execute it? Through the Netzach, Hoid, Yisoid, and Malchus. And you can see this idea, I give you this example, Netzach and Hoid. It's explained in Igeres HaKodesh Tezvav 15, which is really 4 back, whatever. And Alter Rebbe explains each and one of the Midas. And he explains them thoroughly. Actually, it's the only chapter in the entire Tanya. Alter Rebbe in great length and in great details brings a parable the way it is in man's own experience, which means the interaction between man and another fellow human being, father, son, teacher's pupil, and then he brings it over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and again in great elaboration. He doesn't do it throughout the entire 5 segments for that matter. He does mention the first time he mentions the midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the 3rd chapter of Likutei Amorim, to click away. And he says Ava V'Yira, they are the chief midas, and all the other ones are branches. Actually, he groups Ava V'Yira, but we know it's also Ava V'Yira and Rachmim. Chesed Gvura Tiferes. Tiferes is also a Pnimis Dikin Midah. In its experience, Rachmanis, compassion, which is associated with Tiferes. We explained a number of times. At the beginning of Yud Zayin, actually, in Geras HaKodesh, we explain why is Tiferes it's a combination of Chesed and Gvura. For obvious reasons, Chesed is only, it's beginning of Yud Zayin. It will take even extra time. We don't need it. Beginning of Yud Zayin, you get us a Kodesh. We explained it. First or second class, but the first page indeed. So Netzach Hoid Yisoid Malchus, so you can see it again in Tezvav, that it goes through all the Midas. So I would just say, I mentioned that I would bring about in the 10 spheres. Of course, he mentions Chochma in the 2nd chapter of Likutei Amorim. But dealing with the Midas himself, the Esser spheres, the Esser Midas, he begins in Perek Gimel of Likutei Amorim. We click away, the first segment. But there he only speaks about Ava V'Yira, Chesed and Gvura. In Tezvav, he goes through every single Midah. And what you see in all these Midas, Netzach Hoid Yisoid, where he groups Netzach Hoid, it's about also associated with the execution of the sensation, the expression, the actual anchoring the sensation of Chesed Gvura Tiferes in making it real. If it's the Tzachon or the Alter Rebbe explained Netzach V'Hoid. Today, the way the Alter Rebbe explains it there, called Kleis Yoyatzos. This is all about how the person materializes or brings that sensation into reality, into actuality. And so to Yisoid, and so to Malchus, particularly Malchus, the way it becomes associated Malchus Pes, associated Machshava Dibur Maisis, Mamish, realizing the matters of the emotional experience. That's thought, speech, and action, bringing it to thought, bringing it to speech, bringing it to action, which is, of course, concretizing the experience. And that's the reason why the other levels or the other spheres, the chokhmah, the pnimis of chokhmah can't come into bina. It can't be part of the bina experience. We explained it last week. The pnimis of bina cannot form a midah. It has to be the chitzainis of it. The pnimis of midas, usually, the pnimis, the excitement of it, cannot express themselves in the realization of that sensation, because one is somewhat sensational, and then just to bring that to anchor it into a state of, especially when you're talking machshava dibur ma'aseh, thought and speech and action, and others, anchoring into reality, making it real, making it palpable, making the experience something which is tangible, meaning to say that making the experience anchoring the experience in reality is, of course, a important step, and many times a quantum leap step, because the person is so overwhelmed with this sensation, and sometimes you want to stay with the sensation, and you don't want to go further and leave the sensation and now concretize it, anchor it into reality. I love you, Hashem, so I'm not going to budge. I'm going to stand with an itzach and godel throughout the entire day, despite after davening, when the person experienced that sensation of love and fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as an example, or love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when that love is gone, so maybe that devotion, that seamlessness between me and my Creator will be compromised. And I cannot compare it to the time I stood by davening. I had that sensation of love, and of course love, and a deep, intimate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what davening is meant to be. That's the experience of davening. And when I leave that experience, I have to establish that the seamlessness from the rest of the day to the experience of davening through my nitzach. No, I don't have this sensation, but I will triumph over my nefesh habahamis. Will be very determined not to bud from this, what Hashem says to do, and to make sure that I chas v'sholom don't cross even the smallest line in the areas that Hashem says not to do, not to talk, not to think, not to look, not to hear. It's nitzachin, and sometimes to leave the sensation and come into reality, that is an important step. And at that point, the pnimis, in order to these netzach yisod malchus to be executed, to be expressed, to be manifest, the sensation has to kind of be minimized or contained in order to go on with the execution, the realization, the implementation of that very sensation, which is again the chesed, glory tiferes, the ava, the yira, the rachamim, which are sensational experiences. The netzach yisod malchus is realizing them, and therefore it's again, I'm leaving the sensation in order to make it real, and namely in a time when the sensation of davening kind of dissipates, which is usually after davening, as we know, that I'm going to hold on. So we can understand that the whole idea of netzach yisod malchus, why there the Alter Rebbe says, there you could have a connection pnimi. It's not a contradiction. We say pone le'yiro, because in this case the whole netzach yisod malchus is kind of a chitzenius structure. The whole entire structure of netzach yisod malchus is about chitzenius. So in that chitzenius, if you will, there you had a kesher pnimi, as opposed to chesed gvura tiferes. It's not about chitzenius, it's a sensational experience. There's a lot of pnimius there. So there we say uponai lo yiro, and again from bina to midas. If the bina is in full state of manifestation, the midas don't kick in. Again, we explained this last week, and explained so many areas in Teres Achsidus, and we could, and it's evident when a person's mind is so, when there's the mind appreciation of any matter, and there's the expansion of bina, and then the person doesn't necessarily take that das to narrow it in to create the experience of midas. It usually does not happen. There's always the gap. It says in Chassidus, a number of other places, that's why the neck is the most narrow part of the person, because there is, so to say, a dissonance usually between mind and heart. Even though mind is the producer of the emotions, Alter Rebbe has in Sepir Gimel Kute Amor, in the same third chapter, that at the end of the day, the midas are called toilers, the production of Chabad or Chacham Midas, but nonetheless, it's a great symptom, a great contraction, a great condensement of the experience of Bina, in order that the midas should be manifest. They should kick in as the midas experience, the sensation of the love, the fear, or the compassion. And when the love and fear and compassion are in full expression, then it's also difficult to the nihim, which is Netzach Yisay Malchus, to be expressed, because you're so involved in the pnimius and the experience of the Abba, the Yira, and the Rachamim. So the chitzonius only of Chesed Gvura and Tiferes is what ultimately manifests in the Netzach Yisay Malchus. But with Netzach Yisay Malchus, that is chitzonius. Means that is the actualization of all the entire previous experience of the Chochmah, the Bina rather, and the Midas. So of course there you could have had a connection pnimi, because the whole idea is V'ra Isa as Achir. These Midas are lechatchila in the onset. They are the Achirayim, the about face, so to say, of the very first and chief Midas Chesed Gvura and Tiferes. There it's the sensation of love. There's the sensation of yira, of fear, awe, reverence, and so to Rachmanis. While this is the implementing, the second generation, so to say, taking that experience and translating into thought, speech, action, triumphing the message that the person experiences, namely by davening as example, classically by davening, where he's able to arouse this Av, Yira, and Rachmanus, the three Midas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. And after davening, that is lost. In other words, the exhilaration, that emotional, that passion, of course, is dissipated after that. I mean, it's meant to be so. If not, we would never be able to accomplish. We would really get out there in Fifth Avenue and transform the world, and make the world for a domicile for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we would be so involved in our own cocoon of davening and the experience, the sensation of the experience. How could you go out there? How could you deal with the realities of HaKadosh Baruch Hu if you're always in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, you're in the middle of davening as an example? So it does dissipate. But the question is, what happens with the experience itself? And can I carry through the experience throughout the entire day till I'll find myself in the same spot, in the same, with the same fervorous experience, which is the experience of davening. In other words, my relationship, deep and profound relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the answer is yes, I can carry it over through the entire day, but not with that experience itself. A person does not daven an entire day, even though it's a l'vai sheispal, because this is in a way, you can see how sweet the Gemara doesn't say a person should daven a whole day. It says halavai, because who wants to ever leave that cocoon of davening? Nobody. Mentioned a few times, this great chassid said, there was this great chassid that said that whoever really ever exercised a real good davening, any other taiva, any other lust, proclivity, which could develop even within Nefesh Bahamis, it doesn't come close, and the person would never want to invest in any other covet and lust if they experience a beautiful davening. And a person's meant to, and again, we spoke about this a few times, it's not about the shakal, it's about the inward connection, and ultimately a deep and profound and an intimate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And whoever wants to leave that experience, nobody. One has a right mind on their head, of course, or a right heart, a right sensation in their heart, of course, who would want to leave that experience? Nobody. But this is our mandate, that we close up the davening and we take the energy of davening and we execute that experience and the message of davening throughout the entire day. That's the Netzach Yisay Malchus. That's Chatchil, the onset. The Chitzonius, the Achorai, by definition of what it is, it's the Achorai of the Pnimius, of the Midas. And so too, the Midas from the Bina, and the Bina from the Chokhmah. So this is the Achorai, and David says, V'ra Isas Achorai. So of course, Moshe connected not to the about face of Netzach Yisay Malchus, but to the Pnimius of Yisay Malchus, because you have Netzach Yisay Malchus, that is Again, let's just say this again. It's the implementation, it's the anchoring, the experience of Av v'Yira and Rachamim. So the onset, it is Chitzenis, it is the Achiraim. And when Hashem says V'ra Isa, which means you'll have that gaze, you'll have that connection via vision, which is usually a Pnimizdik connection, Es Achir. So there he had a connection into the Pnimis of Netzach Yisod Malchus, is what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. That's what he says. Pnimius, right before even when we started today, the Einim B'chinas Pnimius, which again answers the question. Why do you say Chitzenis, Achirei, not Pnimius? Achirei, Bina, not Pnimius. Achirei, the Midas, the chief Midas, not the Pnimius. And why do you say you stop at the Pnimius? That's the answer. Because the whole Netzach Yisod Malchus is the Achirei. And they just said the Ra'isa is a real Pnimius. So he saw the Pnimius of Netzach Yisod Malchus. So again, the Arizal gleaned all this from the very pasuk of Ra'isa Achirei Panei Leiro. We could say this again because, after the explanation, maybe it'll be even clearer. So let's try. I mean, it's pretty clear. So the Cheraim B'Chacham, which is invested in Bina, which is invested in the Pnimis of Netzach Yisod Malchus, but said Neivus Chacham Shalomai L'Teir. It says that there's the Darga of Moshe Rabbeinu he was more in the Neivus, which comes from Neivus means which drips from. So like you have a cup, for example, you have everything in the cup, and then what the cup would pour over, it's the chitzenis of the cup. Means say there's the pnimis of the cup, what it contains, and then it has a mandate, like someone wants to drink something, he takes it the outside of the cup, serves the purpose for something outside of the pnimis of that very keli, of that vessel. So it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was a connection to the Neivus Chacham Shalom Aleichem, which is the Torah. Torah was given through Moshe Rabbeinu. Torah is called Torah Moshe Abdi Masar Nafshi Allah, and he was the one who Misara, he gave it over. He was Mikabel Torah Misara. So Torah is the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Nikras al Shmai. So Moshe he pulled away from the Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, pulled the Torah for it. So the Torah, of course, anchored and sourced in Chachma, understandably, but the fact is Torah came down, was pulled away, so to say, from Chachma. So it does have the Chachma, but on the other hand, it was taken from on high and given to Am Yisrael. Maton nasati lachem, or lekach toiv nasati lachem. So the neivus to Chachma Shalamayla is Torah, and in this context is that Moshe Rabbeinu only received the neivus, the about face. This what drips from Chachma, which in the end is Torah, which at the end is Zoh. He says in a number of places the connection of Torah to this level of Zoh. Which is Ze'ir Anpin, literally translated small faces. And yes, we explained the difference of Ze'ir Anpin and Arich Anpin in this very chapter. So it was the first class, I believe. This is the third. So it was the first class, or maybe even the second, but we explained that we have there the Lashon in Kesser, it's Arich Anpin. Long faces, Ze'ir Anpin is short faces. We explained it. Again, in the previous classes, no need to re-mention, but that's the level of Torah, and that's what it says. It's all based on the pasuk. Hashem says, "You'll see my about face, but my face itself will not. You will not be able to see." Ayin Shom, look there in Shar Nevuah, the first page. Here, the Alter Rebbe asks the question: This was Dargus Moshe Rabbeinu, the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, and again, we can't make light of seeing the pnimis of Nehim, of the on high. And even we say that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't Ra'isa Sachayre, because the Torah says, remember we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, or what Moshe Rabbeinu was able to perceive, what Moshe Rabbeinu was able to connect. It's not even comparable to anything. And the Alter Rebbe has it a few times. Whoever could have even a glimpse, even a Moshe, rather who could ever connect. He speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Moshe, in the context of Moshe Rabbeinu being the leader of Am Yisrael for all time, for perpetuity, for me, for you, for every Yid. Nonetheless, Alter Rebbe says a few times, make no mistake, there's Dargas Moshe, and what Moshe Rabbeinu allowed us to tap into by showing us a certain way, a certain conduct. So Alter Rebbe, in the end of the day, says, in one hand, who has the audacity to identify, to try to believe that they have anything of the Darga of Moshe Rabbeinu, not at all. However, the Alter Rebbe says in those chapters where he expresses that very expression, who would think that they could ever have any connection to the level of Moshe? Nonetheless, the Alter Rebbe says, a bit, because he is Moshe Rabbeinu, he's our teacher, he wasn't a private person. So if Teda tells us about it, Moshe Rabbeinu it was very clear for Moshe Rabbeinu what he stood for, who he was. So a little bit, because he's Rabbeinu, he's namely our Rebbe, he is Moshe Rabbeinu, so therefore a little bit, Efes Kotzei Hashem Minei, we could incorporate into our Avodas Hashem. And again, Dr. Rebbe has it quite a few times throughout the entire Sefer Tanya. So as well over here is the idea that yes, we can, and we're meant to incorporate this idea, what Moshe Rabbeinu was able to identify with on the Anhai, but nonetheless, there's no comparison. So even when you say which seems to the Moshe Rabbeinu did not connect to the pnimis of all these levels, but he's Moshe Rabbeinu and he was able to vera isa, he's able to see. And as the Alter Rebbe himself is going to explain, whoa, you're talking about seeing, like you see a table and a chair and whatever it is. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see these dargas. So as much as we're saying upon le'iro, remember it's Moshe Rabbeinu. What Moshe Rabbeinu saw, the average person will never be able to see. Yet, in comparison to Moshe, it was Vereisa es hachayre upon le'iro. And this is where the Arizal gleans this information. Now the question is, ask the Alter Rebbe. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam shehakol neh b'dvarim. So the Alter Rebbe asks a simple question. And for that matter, this is coming from the Arizal himself. And if you look at the Torah of the Arizal, you see that Arizal discusses and explains and thoroughly explains all these high, lofty levels which are Bina, Chochmah, and for that matter he explains even this which is higher than Chochmah. The Keser, actually, which we know a bit of the different levels of Keser, Arichampin, Atikim, and even higher, Ak, and he explains about the Reishis HaKav, again, still saying this in a general term. And then the Eirin Sof Shalifni Atzimtzum, the Eirin Sof, the famous Eitzrus Chaim, the famous presentation of the Arizal about the Tzimtzum Arishan, the first Tzimtzum, the first contraction, which the Eibishter Kaviyochel, we say Kaviyochel because it's just the Eir had to leave a certain domain in order there should be a trickle of light, that there should be able to be Eilames, worlds, spheres, whatever we have in the entire Seder Shtalshus order of evolution, and that could have not existed in the face of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's nothing finite, even holy as Elam Atzilus cannot stand and be defined or exist in the face of the infinity. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to remove his area Godla Bilti Bagbul, not remove totally, because there's no place which is the void of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even now, after the Tzimtzum and after the same Eibishter, which is before the Tzimtzum, the same Eibishter before creation, we say it every single day, and we proclaim, you are the same. It's exactly, Ani Hashem lo yishanisi, there's no difference, but at the end of the day, it appears so. And that appearance had to come into the picture in order that Eilamis should be created, because without that Tzimtzum, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, he contracted his light, meaning to say that Begoli, not Be'etzim, meaning to say Hashem is everywhere, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to say, it's like turned off the light. Sometimes you walk into a room, and you know someone's in the room, and they're hiding behind the door, and you're 100% sure they're there. You just don't see them. Are they in the room? It's 100% they're in the room. There's no windows, there's no doors, and you know that they walked in front of you. But you don't see them, so they're behind the door. They're behind the chair. They're hiding. Are they there? Yes. Are they there in that room exactly the same way as if they were sitting at the table, that you were able to see them? From the perspective of being there, yes. The perspective of you seeing the other party, no. And so too it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed his Eira Bilti Balgvul Al Tzadi, made the Cholol, and in the Cholol, in order that kind of the removal of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So of course, again, in that area, the whole infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was there, but he hid, he was mitzamtzim, that it shouldn't be evident. And then in there was a trickle of light, which is known as the Kab, and from the Kab, all the elements came about. So even the Arizal spoke about these high levels, higher than Atzilus, Keser and Ak, and even the Eidens of Shlifni Atzintzum. Here you're saying that Moshe Rabbeinu Pani Leiro, that he didn't even have a shaykhus to the premise of the Midah. He said much more so the premise of Bina, and more so the Midah of Chachma, and all of a sudden it said that the Arizal is talking about areas which is even beyond Chachmi law. As you look in the Teres of Arizal, expanded out through Teres of Chassidus. So what's happening? Ask the Alter Rebbe. So apparently this is wondrous, means that there's such a deep question. Question brings wonder. It says, the pasuk says, there's no prophet would ever rise any time among Yidden like Moshe Rabbeinu, and that would include the date of the Arizal, the generation of the Arizal. So the question is, how did the Arizal appreciate and precede more than Moshe Rabbeinu? Ostensibly. And he said a number of discourses about Pnimius of the Anhai. Even in the Sfiris and many levels which are higher than Chochmah, which we said Moshe Rabbeinu did not perceive the Pnimius of Chochmah, nor the Pnimius of Bina, nor the Pnimius of the Midas. And the here that Arizal is talking about and explaining and had these presentation of multiple discourses about the Pnimius even on these levels, which is even higher than Chochmah and higher than Keser of Atzilus. What's that supposed to mean? The Rebbe answers, it's so simple and understood to all. She has saga sagas chacham midas and sagas Moshe Rabbeinu l'shol. Mashar Nevi'im and Nevuah mechol meksiv because of rather b'shem re'iyah mamash v'ra'isa sachayir v'eres Hashem, says the Nabi, or v'yireh of Hashem, which is Avraham Avinu, that Hashem appeared to Avraham Avinu. So the Alter Rebbe answers and reconciles that it's so obvious, as the Alter Rebbe says, that there's such a great difference of the Chachmei HaEmes, like that Arizal, and for them Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, which spoke, and again, all these areas which is higher than Midas, and Bina, and Chochmah, and so on, documented in the Zayar. And the Arizal expands on these same ideas time and again. So, the simple reconciliation is that the Sagas Chachmei HaEmes like the Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and again, many more like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, but he speaks about, again, the iconic Tanya, which had that connection, or the author of Zayir HaKodesh, which speaks about all these different ideas, and again, elaborates on them, and many discourses on them, and including the Arizal, which again, explain the Torah of the Pnimis Torah, explain Zayar, the Zayar, in so many different ways, authored by the Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, which was known not only the Tana, the great Tana in Nigla Torah, but the great Tana in the esoteric part of Torah, being the author of the Zayar. So he quotes Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal, but of course many more. But he says Kid Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Reb Arizal because they were the iconic Mikubalim, if you will. But they had a perception, they had soga. Moshe Rabbeinu had re'iyah, he had vision. Could you compare vision to conviction, intellectual conviction? Even there is conviction. You cannot compare. We see it evidently in halacha. A judge that's actually a eid nasa dain, is a witness can never become a judge. Why so? He saw it. Let him join the judges and come out with a verdict. No, a judge hears a story. It has to resonate with him. He has to make sense of it. And then he has to come to that clarity that probably that's the way it happened. So you have witness, which contributes to that decision making, to that clarity, to the conspicuousy of the message or the narrative through the witness, as an example. But then another witness comes in, it didn't happen that way. What's the judge going to say? A moment ago, he had that conviction that probably the way this witness came, this witness came, and said of her story with so many details and so accurately. So There was a conviction. It resonated. But another witness could say, no, it didn't happen. Or like the Eidim Zim, you were with us in another place at that time where you say that this all occurred. The mind of the Dayan changes in a moment. And he had a whole story and he thought that's the way it is. Comes another witness says, no, it wasn't like that. You're with me, or the party you're talking about wasn't in the same area. He denies, the other witness denies what the other party said. And he claims that he's fabricating a story. Now the judge, which a moment ago pretty much believed the first witness, he came with all sincerity, and he said the story, presented something which felt so real, and then the other party, in a moment, breaks the story and changes the entire narrative, and then the Dayan, kind of a little dumbfounded, if you will, but nonetheless, okay, these are two parties. Each one is coming and telling me a narrative, and I, based on the rules of Torah, have to decide, me and my fellow Dayanim, judges, which are usually 3, or sometimes there's 23, sometimes there's 70, in the time of Beit HaMikdash as an example, we have to come to a conclusion how this really, or the way Torah sees the story, which is usually Yachid B'Rab, Malachik Rab, go after the majority, and so on. Or we challenge the witnesses, and we see if the witnesses comes through, authentically and with greater honesty, and so on. And the Dayan has to put his mind to it, and eventually he comes to the verdict. But if that Dayan, that judge, as an example, would have seen the story with his own eyes, just seen the story with his own eyes, if this person pulled the person's wallet out of his pocket, he would see. You would have not 100 witnesses, 1,000 witnesses, 10,000 witnesses, and beyond would come and say, no, that did not happen. 100,000 can come. It makes no difference to the judge on his conviction that that's exactly the way it happened. Why so? Why in the first case that such honest people, and he trusts those witnesses, and the witnesses come forth and they present a certain case, and there's kind of almost maximum conviction, but it's almost maximum conviction. It's not 100% absolute conviction, because the other party, other witness comes in and it didn't happen that way. The way they come across, denying the first witnesses. Or irrelevant. And then the Dayan says, oh, not so fast. Maybe it didn't happen like that. But you were so convinced a minute ago. Doesn't matter. My conviction was based on my intellectual appreciation of the matter via the information which was presented by the witnesses. That's it. So when another witness comes and says, no, it didn't really happen that way, maybe not. And I go back and forth. What do? I use the tools of Torah and the rules of Torah, how to come about with a verdict. But I don't know at a certain point what party is saying the truth. And sometimes I'll never know. I still use the rules of Torah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrates everything that justice will be served. If you use the rules of Torah, justice will be served. But if that same judge saw this story with his own eyes, there's no starting point. That's what it says, Einid Nasadai. No witness can never become the judge. Because the judge has to be somewhat objective to be able to receive both parties, both opinions, both sets of witnesses which are presenting the narrative. And then use the tools and the rules of Torah how to come up with a verdict. But the judge saw, or the witness which saw he should become a Dayan, a judge, there's no way that he'll be able to look at this case differently, and many, many witnesses will come to contradict this, what he saw. There is no way he's going to budge from this which he saw with his own eyes. Therefore, Einid Nasadai, no witness cannot become a judge, because this judge has to maintain a certain objectivity. And his information is based on what he hears, he learns, he understands, he appreciates. That's Hasaga. But you can't compare Hasaga to Riyah. So when we find the Arizal, and the Arizal talking about these high, lofty levels, of course they have clarity. They didn't just say this kind of, let's put together a puzzle of Chochmah and Keser and Arich and Atik and Akana, let's put together an interesting puzzle, which, by the way, those who learn Zayar, it's important they learn Chassidus Chabad, because a lot of them are putting together puzzles in their mind, in their teachings, in their writings. Can't say they don't have any understanding of it, of course they do, but that's part of the gift of Chassidus Chabad. It takes these very ideas, lofty, abstract ideas from Kabbalah, and it presents it Shulchan Ha'aruch, like it says. The reason why the Shulchan Aruch is called Shulchan, because the codifiers of Jewish law, they put it like on a prepared table, look at it, enjoy it, grab it, consume it, because it's all there for you. It's laid out on the table. Shulchan Ha'aruch Lifneim. Like the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu, Mishpatim Tosim Lifneim, like a Shulchan Aruch. That's what the Rabbeim did, starting from the Alter Rebbe. That's what's called Chassidus Chabad. It took these lofty ideas and he put it into Chochmah, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, which means that the human cognitive faculties could capture and appreciate and understand these high, lofty ideas. Shimba Yochai did have an understanding because he was there. He was in the area which he was dealing with. And of course, the Arizal as well. But it's still that conviction which comes through Hasaga, through appreciating it, through understanding it, through identifying it, through the accuracy which they developed with their cognitive faculties, their Chochmah Das, to appreciate this information. But it's still about Hasaga, it's still about understanding, it's still about perception, it's still about appreciation, intellectual appreciation. Moshe Rabbeinu was V'ra'isa. Yes, it was a Chayre, but it was Re'iyah. It was vision. The conviction of vision is not just a little more or a little of a deeper type of conviction. It's day and night. It's a total different idea. So when you say Moshe Rabbeinu only saw this level and the previous of Netzach Yisrael Malchus and Darizal and the Bashim Echai Darizal as an example, spoke with other Mekubalim. He says, Kiarizal, again, they were the chief Mekubalim, if you will, the chief authors or presenters of Pnimius HaTorah, starting from Shimba Yochai, the author of the Zayar. So as much as they understood, it was still in the level of Avana Masag, of understanding. And with understanding, they reached much higher and deeper levels, but they didn't have Re'iyah. So perception there is, conviction there is, but you can't compare it to actual seeing. So Moshe Rabbeinu only was as a chayre, but v'ra'isa. Thus the difference of Moshe Rabbeinu and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, Rizal, says the Alter Rebbe. So he says, there was va'ere, re'iyah mamash, seeing mamash, v'ra'isa is a chayre is an example, v'eres Hashem, like it says by the other Navi, by Cheskel. I believe it's Cheskel. Vayeri Elav Hashem, Avraham Avinu Hashem appeared to. There was Vayera. Avraham was able to have that seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, when we say seeing, is it mamish like you see a table with your physical eye? Of course not. Because you don't see something physical when you look at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem's not physical. He's beyond spiritual and beyond physical. But in the same token, it's not like mamish seeing something with your own eye. But the fact, says the Alter Rebbe, that the Torah uses that terminology, which is to the human being the greatest conviction, which because I see it, I'm able to put my eyes on something physical, palpable, tangible. That's what I look at, and that's what I see. And if I see it, my mind captures it, my vision captures it. And again, there's the 100% conviction. So you cannot say it on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a thing that you look at. He's Hashem. He created everything. So it's not exactly like actual physical vision. So the Alter Rebbe says, of course not. But the fact that the Torah uses that terminology of Vayera Elav Hashem Avraham Avinu or Va'era or Moshe Rabbeinu V'ra'isa, that tells you that it's very similar to the idea of vision, which we know in brief, it's called the sensory vision. I see it with my senses, even though I don't see it like I see the table and the chair as an example. So we'll stop over here, but let's see it inside. Alter Rebbe writes, seeing something from Moshe Rabbeinu and see the Eibush with his physical eye. Hashem transcends physical, for that matter, and spiritual, but of course he didn't see anything physical. Nonetheless, in the end, if Torah uses this lashon, if Torah uses this expression, the nimshach tzarich lizdem l'mashal, if Torah uses this expression, so the nimshal, the message has to be very simple, very very similar. That is to the parable, to the euphemism over here, which Torah uses euphemistically the terminology of re'iyah, seeing. It has to be very similar. Ukitargum vayeda l'Hashem v'izgalio lei. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself. The Targum, which means the Targum Onkelos, which is usually in every single Chumash, which came from Onkelos Hager famously, and he wrote a Targum, a translation of Torah. So he writes on Vayeda v'izgali that Hashem revealed himself to Avraham Avinu, as an example. Revealing oneself to Avraham is, you justifiably say the word Re'iyah, and more so the Torah uses Vayera. It's not a matter of justifiably, not justifiably in our minds we can appreciate Vayera, that is, rather. Hashem revealed himself. So it's not only just an intellectual conviction, but it's an actual a vision, like a sensory vision based on the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which revealed himself to Avraham Avinu, and so too when it comes to the other Nevi'im, and so comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vera Isa. He had vision, and a vision, a total different idea, which is his galus, which is about revelation, Nikolai Love and Elam Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the element of the hiddenness, the concealed dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was revealed. Blessed be he, that is, was revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu in a revealed manner. Then the Torah goes on, as opposed to the Chachmei Emes. Should we go on a little more? Let's try to see if we can go to Mashiach Masokos Chachmei Emes, as opposed to the Chasoko, the appreciation, the perception, that is, of the wise of truth. It wasn't a revelation. Actually, they were able to perceive the hidden dimension of the hidden Chochmah. Umufal mehem, this which was so removed from them, they were able to perceive, not see. So the difference is so stark. We'll stop over here with the text. So the difference is so stark, as we just explained. So that reconciles, and that answers the question. On one hand, we say that Moshe Rabbeinu only had a pnimius, he had a understanding only in the about face of these higher levels. Where did he really connect to? Re'iyah is Netzach Yisod Malchus. The fact that the Arizal or Reb Shimon Bar Yochai spoke about levels which are much higher than Hod Yisod Malchus, and Netzach Yisod Malchus, it was distinct, it was different. There they understood it, and they did understand it. They had thorough understanding. It wasn't a puzzle they were putting together. But you can't compare it to Re'iyah, to actual vision, even though we're talking about sensory vision, but vision no less. Vizgalilei, Hashem revealed himself to Avraham Avinu, to the Navi, and in Moshe Rabbeinu's case, V'ra'isa, there was vision, and that is distinct, and therefore it's two different hands-on on these matters of on high. Moshe Rabbeinu's, which he connected through vision, and the others which connected with these levels, and maybe even higher through asaga, through perception. Have a wonderful